Hey everyone, so my name's Santino D'Agostino, and I'm going to be presenting on the three big issues with Twitter from a journalist perspective. So since Twitter's rise, it's amassed billions of users and has become a top tier platform for journalists to spread information and communicate with their audiences. But it also has become a place where the everyday journalists wrestle between their identity as a professional and as a human being. A place where commenting on the news simultaneously makes them a part of its impact, and a place that seemingly makes journalists' jobs much easier, but dilutes the stories in which they're tasked to strengthen. Each of these issues I'm about to outline, as seen on the screen, raise questions about future implications, necessary adjustments, and harsh realities about journalism in the 21st century and moving forward. So let's get into it. So the first issue that comes to mind is the voice of the brand versus the voice of the individual. Twitter acts as amplification for brands in themselves, giving them a platform to, advertise and spread their information, and a twofold application for individuals associated with a brand. So that being said, that reality blurs the line between company brands and individual voices. When you think about a place like the AP, the Associated Press, you don't normally see their employees taking on a more personal nature on Twitter. But you will see more of that with outlets like Vox or Slate. You'll see that they allow more freedom for the individual to express, their personal life under, the umbrella of the brand. So that's why I say conventionally legacy outlets draw the line between the company and the individual more stringently than do modern digital-born outlets like the ones that I described. A case that we have here is Lauren Wolf. She was fired after tweeting that she had, quote, chills watching Joe Biden's plane land as he was en route to his inauguration. According to a Vanity Fair article, a New York Times source says Wolf was warned multiple times about her social media behavior after staffers expressed discomfort with her tweets that bordered on being political. And according to the same story, the Times said on a phone call that her name and the Times were in headlines all over the place and, quote, we can't have that. But the Times does uphold that they didn't fire her over a single tweet. So this right here raises a question, two questions kind of. One is a question of, is it fair? Should journalists have the freedom to speak freely when tied to a larger brand? And more so, as Twitter's grasp continues to grow and their platform continues to grow, how will this conflict affect the relationships between journalists and their employers in the future? And we will dive into that. But the second issue, that what I believe is probably one of the most interesting ones, is the paradox of, quote, significantly insignificant news stories. So, Twitter users who use the platform to denounce the prominence of a bogus story are hypocritically driving said story's prominence. And it's important to say that this isn't necessarily on purpose. As Twitter users, just personal people, we like to engage in the conversation. We like to retweet stories. We like to quote tweet stories and talk about how stupid they are. It's like, why is this trending? But we're also taking part in the fact of why it's trending by doing that. So Robinson Meyer, staff writer at The Atlantic, he says, on Twitter, ideas are so commodified that to say something is simultaneously to amplify it. You're never, quote, just saying on Twitter. You're always doing. And what he means by that is that you're never just saying, oh, this is a stupid trend. You're adding to the trend itself. One example of this is the hashtag Never Warren problem that came up. So during the 2016 Democratic primary campaigns, tensions, I think it was 2016, it might have been 2020. But during the Democratic primary campaigns, tensions grew between the competitive campaigns of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And after Senator Warren seemingly brushed away a handshake from Sanders on the debate stage, hashtag Never Warren began to trend on Twitter. A number of leftist journalists and Sanders supporters noticed the trend and started to send tweets opposing it. But that actually drove the hashtag's popularity thanks to the Twitter algorithm. What was a nothing burger one moment soon became one of the most biggest stories in the country, and the media didn't know how to interpret it. Was Warren's campaign coming down? Were people actually pissed off? few people are willing to dive into each and every tweet. But as you can see here, Ben Collins, I believe he works for MSNBC. He actually pointed out that the top 3 tweets about the hashtag all denounce people using it. So let's say you went on Twitter yourself and you saw that hashtag Never Warren was trending. You'd be like, oh, wow, people are really coming at Senator Warren, I guess. But if you didn't take the time to actually look into the tweets and click on why it's trending, you could write a completely bogus story. And I feel like that could have some bad implications in the future for using Twitter as a sort of news source and not diving into why certain things are happening on the platform. And it can also lead to journalists labeling public opinion in a wrong way. Like in this case, it wasn't that people were necessarily hashtag Never Warren. They just were using the hashtag to draw attention to how dumb the hashtag is, which is obviously, as we've talked about, counterintuitive to their plan, I guess. So the question that this raises is, how will this problem evolve and how will it affect journalists and their stories in the future? And moving on, the third and final issue that I see with Twitter is that as of right now, journalists use tweets as just primary sources in their story. So when we look at the current reality, tweets are considered primary information sources that create the product of news. And journalism subsequently is the profession of creating news. This is just not the reality we should be aiming for. We should be aiming for a reality that tweets are leads that require verification and primary sources that offer additional information and context to a broader story. And journalism isn't the profession of creating news, it's the act of verifying information, using it to obtain more relevant information, and presenting the findings acquired from those actions. So, like I said, every news story that is embedded in as a tweet, every news story that we read today embeds a tweet as a source of information. We see this literally on every single news site. But when we do that, we sort of take like a backseat as journalists and just allow the Twitter user to become the journalist and just assume that the work has been done for us already. But we can't do this because tweets are from normal people, and that'll also tie into something I talk about in a few more slides about how we have to turn away from this notion that everyone is a journalist, because it's just simply not true. And we'll move on. So my opinion of what the future holds is linked to what we were just talked about. When we think of, voice of the brand versus voice of the individual, this is what I think about: institutional media as a means, not an end in the future. So growing up, we all, before, the rise of more individualized media, we all sort of wanted to work for bigger institutions, anywhere from, I want to play in the MLB to, I want to be signed by this label to, I want to work for CNN or Fox News. Institutional media has always been the end in that sense. We've always wanted to be somewhere, but not be someone. So institutional media, I think, in the future is going to become a means for the individual journalist to establish a personal brand, build an audience, and gain enough leverage that tips the balance of value versus liability in their favor. Because there's always liability when you allow an individual talent to take certain freedoms under the institutional guise. So I feel like as individuals, kind of gain more value and show their institution that they can be trusted, they therefore gain more freedom on social media and other platforms, and their value therefore increases. And at some point, their personal brand could potentially become an institution in itself. Here's some examples I have. You have the two sort of opposite ends of partisan media. You have Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow. These individuals have... Tucker Carlson has 5 million followers on Twitter. Maddow has 10 million. So obviously they have their own personal audience that, millions of followers they have that they could just create their own personal branded institution. Tucker Carlson could easily leave Fox News and start his own media, endeavor, as could Rachel Maddow. And branching out, you also have the more partisan, more ideological Ben Shapiro and Kyle Kulinski. Ben Shapiro obviously started Daily Wire, so his is sort of more institutionalized. Kyle Kulinski, he is, more of the left than Ben Shapiro, of course. But he has the Kyle Kulinski show. And while Kyle Kulinski is the more smaller one of the bunch that I'm going to show here, he does have about 500,000 Twitter followers. Shapiro has 3 million. Obviously, these two, I believe, could cater to their audiences without their institutions behind them. And then you have the two, what I would consider fully decentralized, Joe Rogan and Logan Paul. You have Joe Rogan, who did use institutions in the past, but not in the capacity as a media platform. He was more so just a talent. But now, this day and age, he uses his platform to talk to, important people. And he does so in a, in my opinion, and I think the truth, decentralized way. While he does have advertisers, they're not really, the big companies that are going to influence, the content. And as we've seen recently with Spotify, they refused to take him down. Even with, I think, what's the guy's name? Tim Neal, something like one artist is, sort of protesting by saying he's going to take his music off Spotify if Spotify doesn't remove Joe Rogan. But obviously Spotify's not going to budge. And if, I'm personally a fan of the Rogan Experience, but the show's content has not been wavered by his deal with Spotify, in my opinion. So I feel like it is more of the decentralized type of media. And when you look at Logan Paul, he's basically doing the same thing. He started out, as a Viner, and these platforms he grew from the individualized platforms. So while he is sort of under an institution, I guess, using an institution, he's not at their mercy to a certain extent. Of course, there's always going to be some sort of influence, but as we've seen, his entire brand is about himself, and that's something that I think future media is going to thrive on. And then to bring it even past media into music, you have Eminem, who I believe, I'm not like a music aficionado, but I believe he was signed by Dr. Dre and his label. And from there, today Eminem has his own label, and he's just doing his own thing now. He's his own personal brand. So all these people, with the exception of a few, have started within an institution and now have the ability to just be their own institution, be their own individual. And I think that's something that's really going to help media moving forward, but could also hurt it just as equally. It removes external influences to an extent, but also gives more freedom to the talent. So if an individual talent is screwing something up, that could be disastrous. But of course, there's its pros and cons, and I personally believe it's more of a pro than a con. Stepping forward, we have finding the genesis of trends is more important now than ever before. Think about it. The hashtag Never Warren trend. If you're just tweeting about, oh, this is so stupid, you're more so just joining the conversation and not analyzing it. And I feel like we're socialized to do that as humans, just join the conversation. If we see something, say something. But as journalists, I feel like we need to more take a step back and analyze the conversation. It's very easy to do with Twitter. Just go through the tweets. What's the majority saying? And can you find anything with equal value saying something different? I feel like failing to do that in large numbers results in driving the conversation away from its genesis and artificially increases its impact. So instead of reporting the story, we become one of its many compounding catalysts, and we sort of dilute the genesis of why trends begin. And the hashtag Never Warren trend could have easily started with someone who just did not like Senator Warren at the time. But then more and more, it could have been 1, 2, 100 people compared to the thousands, maybe a million people who compounded the trend in, just simple commentary. So I feel like once we see a trend, we need to jump to the genesis of it, before it spirals out of control and we sort of lose why a trend exists. And moving on, we must recognize, like I said before, that everyone is not a journalist. Everyone has the potential to be a journalist, but that does not mean they are a journalist. I think we really need to emphasize this moving forward, that a tweet is not news. We can't just embed tweets in our news stories and consider that a primary source. A tweet is a medium with the potential to inform and showcase journalism to a broad audience. So while we can use tweets to a certain extent, they should more so be like, I wouldn't even consider it a secondary source. It's more so just a lead that could bring you to a primary source. So I feel like we can't allow embedded tweets in the stories without processing them as journalists. So that sort of wraps it up here. You have the brand versus the individual, the significantly insignificant news stories, and tweets as news. I personally feel like we just need to do better jobs as journalists when it comes to using Twitter, and just be more aware of how the platform works and how we're going to use it as journalists, not as simple users. Because we are more than simple users. We're both a player in the environment of Twitter, but also should be trained to know that environment and recognize certain trends and things like that. So yeah, that's it.